I want to just say that I think really what we are doing here, what you are doing, those of you who are students as well as those of you who are staff and instructors, what you are doing here is advancing the cause of our democracy. It is absolutely dependent on having a well-educated citizenry for us to have a great democracy. And yet we're really at a crossroads where I honestly believe that we have to do a much better job of acting on what we understand and know. And I want to spend a little bit of time tonight saying, I want to review some of the leadership of this country over the last couple of hundred years. Won't be too long-winded about it, but I just think it's important that we understand that we right now as a nation have some of the finest research on education and how children learn that any nation on earth has ever produced. I've been told by numerous people in Europe, in Asia, and in Israel that they often use the American research. They don't have to do it. We did it. Our problem is that we don't have the courage, we don't have the vision, and we don't have the heart to follow through on what we know works. And that is the great challenge of our time. I want to remind everybody that when this country was founded, a lot of people say, you heard me refer to the preamble of the Constitution. Well, they didn't put education in the Constitution, therefore it really isn't a federal concern. I'll tell you something. The founders of this country, let me say first Jefferson. Jefferson, remember, the #1 supporter of states' rights in the history of the country? Jefferson wrote, "Every government degenerates when trusted to the rulers of the people alone. The people themselves are only safe, are the only safe depositories. To render even them safe, their minds must be improved to a certain degree. An amendment to our Constitution must here come in aid of public education." End quote. Tom Jefferson believed we should amend the Constitution to include public education for all. Now, his counterpart, who founded the other political party, Adams, who, in fact, I think we've all come to know a little bit better over the last few years, and he's gone up quite a bit in my estimation. But in fact, as different as they were politically, Adams said this: "Laws for the liberal education of youth are so extremely wise and useful that to a humane and generous mind, no expense for this purpose should be thought extravagant." End quote. Of course, he was from the state that gave the first, anybody here from Massachusetts? That's the first state to give us public education. Think then about Lincoln. It's the darkest days of the Civil War, 1862. It is not at all apparent the United States will prevail in the conflict North versus South. And the truth is that it would have been easy in 1862 for Abe Lincoln to say, we can't be thinking about education. We just got to focus on winning this war. Instead, he did an amazing thing. He signed a bill called the Morrill Act. If you don't know what it is, you should. It is the bill that created a system of land-grant colleges for the United States of America. The fact is that his predecessor, James Buchanan, had vetoed the bill as extravagant. But Lincoln, in spite of the fact he was deeply in debt and in trouble over the war, decided that we should have a system of land-grant colleges. Some of you know what the first one was Berea, Kentucky. But there's a whole bunch of them. In my little old state of California, we've got a little school called the University of California at Berkeley, University of California at Davis, University of California at Riverside. The entire University of California system in California is because of Abraham Lincoln. Some of you know a little school, we got some Texans here. How about Texas A&M? We got some Floridians here. How about Florida A&M? The truth is that every state has at least one land-grant college. There are 181 in the United States of America. Lincoln had no research. He had courage, he had vision, he had heart. In the years after the Civil War, they easily could have said, we can't be thinking about education in this country. We've got to talk about a depression. The nation was terribly depressed after the Civil War. South was completely decimated, and there were real serious problems in the economy of the nation. Instead, every state by the 1900 had created compulsory public education, one of the first nations on earth to do so. And by 1900, we were the #1 manufacturing nation on the face of the earth. No research, courage, vision, heart. All of you know about the Second World War. That was quite a conflict. The United States was rationing rubber, was rationing nylon, was rationing all sorts of food. The United States had produced no cars during the Second World War. I'm surprised how many people don't know that. The whole focus of the nation was on war. But in 1944, Franklin Roosevelt did an amazing thing in my book. He signed the GI Bill of Rights and doubled the number of people attending colleges and universities across the United States. It wasn't clear we were going to win that conflict. We certainly didn't have any money. But Roosevelt had a vision. And by the way, it more than doubled the number of people who went to college, and it created 250,000 new teachers for the United States. Now, in 1946, we had a draft in 1946, just as we'd had in 41, 42, 43, 44, and 45. But in 1946, they turned away a record number of young men. They typically drafted 19-year-old young men. They turned away a record number of them. You know why? To a far greater extent than in 41 to 45. They had bad eyesight, foreshortened limbs, crooked spines, bad teeth. These were the children whose formative years had come during the Great Depression. So Truman did an amazing thing. In spite of the fact that we were in the midst of a Cold War, we were still recovering from the Second World War, Truman said, you know, we should have a National School Lunch Act. And in fact, if you read the act, it says, quote, "It is hereby declared to be the policy of the Congress as a measure of national security to safeguard the health and well-being of America's children," end quote. President Eisenhower was a Republican president. He was president in 1957 when Sputnik went up. The Soviet Union had predominance over the space race at that time. Eisenhower easily could have said, we've got a Cold War, and now we've got a space race. We just can't be talking about education. That's what he could have said. Instead, he signed the biggest college student loan act in the history of the United States of America. It was called the National Defense Education Act. It was designed to help young men and young women become scientists, to become mathematicians, and to become teachers. I tell you all this because I think it's fascinating to think about all these magnificent, important, huge investments that were made on our behalf by people that did not yet have great colleges and universities doing the kind of educational research that we have at our hands today. Truth is, I also like to recall John Kennedy. John Kennedy, when he became president, said, you know, we should put a man on the moon by the end of this decade. Fuel. He said we should put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Now today we know we did that. And it seems pretty logical to people. But for the oldies in the room, few of you may remember that Kennedy was ridiculed. There were those who said, oh, Mr. President, that is too ambitious a schedule. Oh, Mr. President, that is really too expensive a project. Oh, Mr. President, that's too hard. And Kennedy said, we go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard. We need to begin to do some hard work in this country when it comes to educating our children. Now, I want to just say something to all of you. I've been around a long time, long enough to give you this observation. I don't think there's anything wrong with America's children. It's the grown-ups I worry about. It's the country that got rich because it educated its children, did it through war and depression, did it through hard times and challenging global situations. And here we got so wealthy that we were able to produce a ton of great research, and yet what we're lacking today, it seems to me, are values about what's good for our kids. I'll tell you something. I told somebody here this story. In 1965, when I graduated from high school, my folks wanted a new Studebaker, or a new car, I should say. They had an old Studebaker, and they stopped making Studebakers. My dad, who was good with cars, but he was afraid that we weren't going to be able to get parts for that car. Both my parents wanted a new car. My mother wanted a new couch. My brother and I had practiced trampoline activities on the old couch, and it was pretty much in trouble. And my dad really wanted to go to the family reunion in Kentucky. And they wanted to send their daughter to college. They didn't cut everything by 10%. They didn't buy a less expensive car and a less expensive couch and go on a shorter vacation. They didn't do any of those things. They didn't buy a couch. They didn't buy a car. They didn't buy a trip to Kentucky. They sent their daughter to college. And thereby hangs the tale. Forgive me. But at that time, you could still get a good job if you didn't have a college education. Today, the future is really dependent on opening doors for kids for some kind of post-secondary training. And if we don't do that, then there will be hell to pay here in this country. Oh, God. Now, let me just say, the other thing I want to say to you all is it isn't just about the economy. And I'm a good capitalist. I have supported capitalism in my life. I own stock. I've got 401ks. But the truth is, I am weary of people just talking about the economy. I also want to talk about the social value that comes out of a great education, about the sense of justice that you fight for and believe in this program. That's one of the reasons I'm here, because it isn't for me just about getting a good education and making lots of money. The fact is, you know, I've known a lot of people that were rich where some of the pinstripers weren't, because they had education and values about the future. What we have to look at here is this democracy, and this democracy is really on the line. The fact is that the Greeks invented the word democracy. It comes from two Greek words, demos and kratos, government by the people. But what's interesting about the Greeks is they believed not just that the polity and the system was better if you had people participating. The Greeks believed, oh, thanks ever so. I should really have stock in Kleenex. It's actually my father's side of the family. They're just awful. They all cry. They all cry all the time. They're happy, they cry. When they're sad, they cry. It's a ridiculous family trait. Anyway, the Greeks believed that the act of participation changed the individual. And they believed that was more important than the system that you created, the transformation in the individual. And by the way, that's one of the reasons they believed in drama and music and art. So I sometimes say, you know, they were the inventors of modern-day politics as well as the inventors of modern-day drama, and people think I'm saying the same thing. But the truth is that we're confused these days. They actually, though, believe that when you got on the stage to perform, that it changed you forever. And I believe that too. I don't think I would be here today if it weren't for a high school drama teacher named Mr. Deck. I went and did a scene in his class. And I was a sophomore, and I was really an ingrown toenail disguised as a 14-year-old. I was so shy, and I know this is hard to believe, but I was so shy and so awkward that it was embarrassing to even look at myself in the mirror. And I did this scene from a play called The Man Who Came to Dinner with another young woman who happened to be fairly shy, and we knew each other, and we had a marvelous time doing this scene. And the next year, Mr. Deck cast the play, The Man Who Came to Dinner. And I didn't audition because I was just too shy to audition. And the last day of auditions, Mr. Deck stopped me in the hall and said, "Eastin, what is the matter with you? Why haven't you auditioned for this part?" And I said, "Oh, Mr. Deck, I would love to, but I'm really just too shy. I think I'd faint if I got up there." And he said, "Miss Eastin, this is a metaphor for your whole life. If you never try out, you will never get the part." And so I tried out, and I got the part. And the woman who starred opposite me was the girl I had done the scene with. And I saw her 25 years later, and I told her that I'd found Mr. Deck, and I'd taken him to dinner, and we became great friends. You know, I said at a meeting, I really want to find him and thank him because he really changed my life. And somebody in the audience knew him, called him, and he called me on election day when I got elected. It was just a good omen. Anyway, we got to see each other. And later, Nancy Cunningham, Mangini now, who was a reporter for one of the Bay Area papers. She called me, wanted to do an interview, and I told her that story, and she started laughing, and she laughed a little too long and too hard, and I said, "What's so funny?" And she said, "Mr. Deck stopped me the last day of auditions and told me that this was a metaphor for my whole life." The whole act of participation changes us. And so I'm here to tell you that I think what you're learning about how children learn is important, but it's also important that you are concerned about, involved with social justice, and that you are concerned about and involved with getting our kids engaged politically and civically. Because I will tell you, we get richer and stronger as a nation when our people really feel engaged and involved. It changes us forever. Now, I have to tell you, I'm very concerned about the country. I feel really good when I see young people. If I go to a school, my heart lifts, and I am so much better off in terms of my optimism. But if I just hang around with the grown-ups, especially the non-education grown-ups, I get depressed. I start to worry, because everybody's taxes, 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 taxes. What benefit a man if he has the whole world and loses his soul, to quote the poet? The fact is, we all are well off enough as a country that we could afford to invest a little more in helping kids go to college, helping adults go to college. We could all invest a little more in that preschool that I talked about today. The truth is that 73% of the people in America think that if a kid shows up in kindergarten and is behind, they will catch up by the end of elementary school, and they won't. The reality is most of them do not. It's a fiction that exists out there. And so I have to say that for me, especially in California, I'm very concerned, because we were 5th of the 50 states, and today we're something like 48th. We were the state that did a lot in both higher ed and in preschool, by the way. And here's a little factoid you may not know. During the Second World War, the United States of America put preschools in all 48 states. You know why they did that? So many women were in the workforce. So as a matter of national priority, the United States of America created a public preschool system in all 48 states. There were only 48 then. And when the war ended, they closed it down. But you know what? We have a higher percentage of women working today than we had at the end of the Second World War. Where are our preschools? Where are our priorities in terms of these children? But for me, I guess I wanted to close by saying I think your call and commitment to social justice really has to be about helping our kids to really feel that we as a citizenry are going to take this country back and fight for the future by fighting for education, by fighting for the health of our kids. I have visited about a lot of schools around this country and around the world where kids are involved in powerful learning through service learning and civic engagement. I have met students who were restoring streams and rivers and protecting vernal pools in the Bay of San Francisco. I've observed students tutoring other students and peers. I've met kids nurturing school gardens and community gardens and better engaging students in terms of how to improve their food options for themselves as well, sometimes as for the needy in their community or the elderly in their community. I've seen industrial arts students engaged in building a house for doctors in a rural part of California. When I was at Mills, I administered the Center for Civic Engagement and Women's Leadership, and in that was contained the Institute for Civic Leadership, and we involved a lot of our Mills women all around the country and all around the world in getting involved in helping students. I could go on, but the important thing is that this is empowering, and we can and must do more to empower our students, because great civilizations inspire great personal achievement and great social responsibility. Great civilizations arise from the imagination and hard work of people who are nurtured by their societies to develop their gifts. In a word, education. Education, the place where personal and social responsibility come together for personal and social greatness. Both together. That is where you and I come in. Because in the great civilizations, cities, counties, and schools are institutional incubators of human potential. In every sense of the word, our job is to create institutional incubators of human potential in our democracy. We must ensure that our schools, as well as our cities and counties, are the repositories of past success and laboratories for the future adventures of our time. Now, for the future greatness not only of our country, we must make our democracy a living, breathing place for the engagement of our students and of our local citizenry, young and old, and everyone in between. We must say to each and every member of this society, most especially to our students, we need you. There are talents in you that you do not yet know about. Maybe you know what they are, maybe you don't yet. That's okay. We will help you identify them. We will help you light a passion for them. We will help you develop them and put them to use. We, the society that loves you and needs you, we, your human family, we have good, productive work for you to do. But you must work with us. You must participate. We must enliven the public to get into the citizenship game. It is not enough to reject the ballot measures. We must offer alternative solutions. The journalist Richard Cohen once observed, "Those with nothing to gain have nothing to lose." That's really why I was talking about Nietzsche earlier today, for those of you who are here. Nietzsche, who said, "He who has a why to live can bear with almost any how." The truth is, our students are looking for the why, and you in this room hold the key. Remember, our young people were very involved in the last national election. Participation was up dramatically. This should not be so surprising. Our college students are closer to the age of our founders than most college presidents are. The reality is, if you stop and think about the founders, let's go back to 1776. Washington was considered a senior leader. We think he was so old because he wore that white wig. He was actually only 44 years old. Jefferson was an old man of 33. Listen to this. Madison was just 25, Hamilton was 21, and Monroe was but 18. Children of all ages can and do make a difference in 2010 as well as in 1776. Archimedes, the great Greek from ancient times, had invented a new tool, a tool called the lever. Someone asked him, "Archimedes, just how powerful is this new tool, this lever that you've invented?" He said, "I'll tell you how powerful it is. Give me a place to stand and a fulcrum and a lever, and I will move the world." That's what I say to our kids. Give them a place to stand and a fulcrum and a lever, and they will move our world. So this is it. I think education is our lever, and I think that the levels of government closest to the people are the most real, and if we tell people the truth, that the schools are absolutely essential for the future of this democracy. I'm for service learning and civic engagement, as I've mentioned. I do believe that the work of our people to use their knowledge and skills and to involve them in it is critical for the success of our children, because that is really how you develop your own personal efficacy. Service learning and civic engagement make our democracy come alive. We need active, well-educated citizens, and we need, in fact, this lever right away. America's young people want to learn how to read and do math, but they also want to know where they fit in. They want to know what they can do. And having lived through this historic election, I would say we have to seize the day and say to our kids, this really is your time. Let me just point out that John McCain and Barack Obama both promised national service in their administrations. This should not be and cannot be made a partisan issue. It is not partisan, it never has been partisan, and it should never be partisan. We must encourage the kind of work collaboratively that will help our kids to work in their communities, whether it's Cincinnati or San Francisco, whether it's Bug Tussle, Oklahoma, or Hayfork, California. The truth is that we have a lot of work to do, but I also believe that America is hungry to participate. Time magazine recently reported that there were 1 million more volunteers in America in 2007 than there had been in 2002. Our only hope for social competence and economic success and the prevalence of our democratic values is to improve education. The day after the election, on November 5th, 2008, Thomas Friedman's column in the New York Times said, quote, "Yes, the struggle for equality is never done. But we can start afresh now from a whole new baseline. Let every child and every citizen and every immigrant know that from this day forward, everything really is possible in America. Michael Sandel said in that same column, it must be about a new patriotism, about what it means to be a citizen. Obama's campaign tapped a dormant civic idealism, a hunger among America to serve a cause greater than themselves, a yearning to be citizens again. We cannot allow this spirit to leave. We cannot allow this spirit to go away. We cannot allow the cynics to take the leadership. We cannot allow this time to fall away from us. Our well-educated forebears really understood this. They were generous and visionary with the future. Coming out of war and depression with no real research to lead them, they made courageous, bold, visionary decisions, and we deserve no less in our own generation. Education, quality education, goes far beyond learning the multiplication tables. Education is most certainly about learning the real work of democracy, and I sincerely hope that you will make it happen when you go back to whichever state you are from. The truth is that I'm worried very much because, in fact, we have in California a lot of quick-fix boutique solutions designed to save money, not to focus on the quality of life of our kids. We recently cut the school year to 175 days, as I mentioned earlier today, when the rest of the world's kids are going at least 200 days, and some are going 220 to 260. So I hope as you go forward, you will ask yourselves, what can I do to make this happen? And a few people like the people in this room, count this room up. There were only 74 people invited to Philadelphia to write that Constitution? You know that only 55 of them showed up? Only 39 stayed behind to sign the document. A small number of people, like the people in this room, motivated, educated, and really on fire to do what's right for kids can make a huge difference. And that's really why I came. I feel very strongly we're at a crossroads in America. I look at people with a straight face who tell me that it's important to keep taxes low in lieu of preschools, that it's important to shorten the school year, and instead of building great colleges, that we try to raise the fees and cut. I don't know about rebuilding Iraqi schools when I see American schools that are falling down around our ears. We cut support for kids in classrooms, and then we wonder why we have such big prisons, why we're locking people up at a higher cost than your education here costs. The founders of this country and educators and leaders for more than 200 years knew that, in fact, what we had to do was to make sure we educated our kids. We educate them or incarcerate them. We love them, and they will love our country and its values. If we fail to do that, they will not. And I will tell you that this work is as important as digging the Panama Canal or the Manhattan Project or the Marshall Plan or building the Golden Gate Bridge or any other thing you can say, building Cape Canaveral, going to the moon. Some education is more important than others, and right now education is more important in this country than it's ever been. Let me just say, in closing, I want to quote from Dwight David Eisenhower, something he said in 1953. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in a final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, and the hopes of its children. In November of 2008, there was a spirit in America that I hadn't felt in a long time. And I want to acknowledge President Bush and the candidate John McCain for their wonderful reflections on the president-elect. We seem to now be falling apart again, and I just pray that you can help bring people together on behalf of children. Because I have to say that no work is more important than getting our young people in the game of democracy, and we adults need their optimism. The fact is, I do salute your work, and I salute it because you're bringing back optimism, I think. Children have it. I catch it from them all the time whenever I visit a school. Children can leap great barriers in a single bound. They have imagination. Children can see through anything. They see with their hearts. Children have moved mountains the old-fashioned way. They have faith. Remember St. Paul to the Corinthians. Over the years of visiting schools, I've had an awakening. At first, it may seem like a trivial semantic distinction to some. To me, it is much more. To me, it explains the power of a child's dream. When we look into the eyes of a child, we often say we see the face of hope. I now realize, after talking to and seeing so many children, it's something more than hope. It is the face of optimism. There's a difference, we hope with our fingers crossed. Optimism is a hand waving at the back of the classroom. Optimism is running to the library. Optimism is trying again and again at the language lab, the computer lab, and the basketball hoop. Optimism is a homeless girl waiting in the tide pools of San Diego, dreaming of being a laboratory scientist. I met her. I know she's in Florida. I bet she's in Texas. The truth is that America is not just in need of hope. The beautiful possibility is obvious. America is in need of a good case of optimism, and you catch it from children and young people. Ladies and gentlemen, I am still a carrier, so I hope we desist from hand-wringing and whistling past the graveyard to remember how our amazing ancestors accomplished so much. Again, they didn't have the wonderful research we've got, but they had courage and vision and heart. I hope you go forward from here with those qualities, as well as with a good dose of optimism. Thank you very much. Sorry about the breaking down there.